Okay, bueno, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I mean, we are in the Plenary B session, which will deal with the biodiversity loss, climate change, poverty and global inequality, links and trade-offs. First of all, I would like to, my name is Jerry de la Paulera. I'm the executive director of Fundación Bunge in Argentina, and I was the former president of GDN, but my boss now is Jean-Louis. So I thank very much GDN for the invitation to to be present in such a difficult topic. But I think that this is a very exciting plenary because we talked a lot about, and I learned a lot in the morning. For example, one of the issues were the problem of the commons. No, it's a very famous problem in economics in which the result is that basically you overexploit consumption. So this creates basically externalities. And then if you have externalities, they do not reflect in prices, as Jean-Louis was a little bit explaining today. And then you have subsidies and taxes to align basically social prices and market price. I'm an economist, as you see. But here, what it is important is today how we are going to link the biodiversity loss and climate change with effective public policy. I mean, with effective public policy, knowing that we have this trade-off. To get this collective action, it was explained, you need to tackle two very difficult aspects. One is that, as you know, citizens and local stakeholders should understand and accept the problematic, no? Because in some sense, there is a tension there. But most importantly, I think what Jean-Louis said is about what is called the rate of discount of the future. The rate of discount of the future means that we might be, I don't know, we might know the problem of biodiversity and climate change, but when we act privately, we discount heavily the future because at some point we want instantaneous satisfaction as consumers, etc. So then you need more advocacy, you need education, and this. So what we are going to do, I will be introducing, so there are very interesting questions. So how can we manage this tension, no? And the session deals with global inequality also, no? So it's not only about local issues, but global inequality. So how is the international governance about those aspects? So the first speakers, we have an extraordinary speakers here. So I'm very pleased that the first speaker is Deshni Pi. I mean, I will not read the CVs because I will be 1 hour here speaking. Deshni is Chief Director, Biodiversity Information and Policy Advice of South African National Biodiversity Institute. So every speaker will have a maximum of 10 minutes. So thank you, Deshni, for coming, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great privilege and pleasure to be addressing you this afternoon and providing you with some case studies of how South Africa has really grappled with this big challenge of developmental challenges, as well as looking at how we address our biodiversity conservation. And I'm wanting you to change, especially for the purists in the room, I'm wanting you to really look at a different way of how we're going to be talking about biodiversity. And specifically, I'm going to be highlighting South Africa and specifically SANBI, the institute that I work for, how we've managed to really use mainstreaming as a tool to speak to other sectors, so outside of our biodiversity sector. So today I'm going to be really looking at how we addressing our developmental challenges through restoring ecological infrastructure. So just for context, South Africa is, of course, like Ecuador, one of the 17 megadiverse countries So, and these are just, a disproportionately few countries that have a very, very high biodiversity. And that's the cultural and biodiversity heritage that we have. It's our responsibility and it's our wealth. So together with the other 17 megadiverse countries, South Africa is a custodian of more than 2/3 of the Earth's species. And sadly, it's also a country that hosts 3 of the global biodiversity hotspots, the 36 recognized biodiversity hotspots. And these are just areas for people that are outside of the biodiversity sector, really areas with high biodiversity, but also very high threats, and usually associated with development. South Africa also has 28 of our recognized Ramsar sites. These are wetlands of international importance that are unique. They have high numbers of species, from water birds to fish to plants, and they give shelter to many threatened species that depend on wetland ecosystem. And then, of course, we have very high levels of endemism, and this is species that are found nowhere else in the world. We house 2/3 of South Africa's plant species are endemic, and half of our mammals, reptiles, amphibians, butterflies, and freshwater fish. So that's just the biodiversity context. So there's our developmental context. So we have very, very high levels of poverty. South Africa is a developing nation, faces really significant socioeconomic challenges. The most pressing concerns, of course, we collectively call the triple challenges of development: poverty, inequality, and unemployment. In 2021, from our census, we had about 30 million people, which is about 55% of South Africa's population, really living below the higher limit of our poverty line. South Africa is also, sadly, one of the most unequal societies in the world. Our Gini coefficient is reportedly 63, and this was in 2022. Highest in the world, as reported by the World Bank. And it's also estimated that 10% of our population control about 80% of the wealth. So you can see quite stark disparities, big biodiversity, but huge developmental challenges. And then, of course, at the core of both these issues are just extreme high unemployment rates. And we have as many as 1 in 3 people of working age unable to find employment. Now, this, of course, drastically increases when you look at our youth category, and so it's about 40 to 50%. And then if we delve deeper, disaggregate that further, it's even higher in the women. So up to 75 to 80%. So really quite a difficult space for us. And we have our National Development Plan, which is our vision for 2030, that really focuses on eliminating poverty, reducing inequality, and then, of course, creating unemployment through several public employment projects and opportunities. So in this context, we don't have the luxury of just having protected areas and having biodiversity conserved. We really have to start looking at taking biodiversity considerations to support development through environmental sustainability and looking at the economic contributions. Okay, and so that brings me to a topic that I will focus quite a lot on today in all of my interventions, and this is around ecological infrastructure. So SANBI has implemented several global donor-funded projects projects from the Global Environment Facility. Also, we've had several French Development Agency projects. We've also had the Adaptation Fund. And now in the new year, we will be implementing projects funded, very big projects funded through the Green Climate Fund. So really looking at how our vulnerable people are adapting to climate change. And at the intersection of climate change, biodiversity loss, and development, really that's how we're developing our projects. But through this long history of implementing these donor-funded projects, and through the mainstreaming work that we've also piloted, we found that there's a whole lot of biodiversity tools and products and maps that are developed, but we're really not making that impact. And that's because we weren't talking the right language to the right people. And in the last 5 to 10 years, we've really invested, coming out of the projects, we've really invested in this concept called ecological infrastructure. And we've heard quite a lot about this. It's not it's just a way of framing so that we can connect with the engineers. We can maybe connect with some economists, but it's really looking at the ecological infrastructure refers to naturally functioning ecosystems that provides benefits to people and the economy. And just like built infrastructure, ecological infrastructure, it's important to manage and maintain it. And this is to prevent it from becoming degraded. So that was the way we started framing our work, or this concept. Of course, South Africa is a water scarce country. I think we're the 30th or 33rd driest country in the world. And ecological infrastructure supports numerous water-related ecosystem services, such as regulating the flow, and then also important, the quality of water. And then importantly, more than half of South Africa's water supply comes from our what we call our flagship ecological infrastructure, our strategic water source areas. So these are areas that just cover 10% of our country's land area, and provides water to about half of the population, and supports 2/3 of the economic activity. So maintaining functional ecological infrastructure in these strategically important areas will not only improve our water security, but supports our development priorities. Oh, I thought I was actually moving faster. Okay, I just have 2 more slides. So that's I mean, the reason I put this slide in is just to show you that in a developing country, there's so many priorities, so we can't conserve everywhere. We had to just prioritize where our interventions were going to be. And that's a map of South Africa and the 22 strategic water source areas. So we've been really spending quite a lot of public funds to restore ecological infrastructure. And this is really, we've been looking at creating jobs for removing alien invasive plants, restoring wetlands, really looking at natural resource management. And these biodiversity-related jobs have, of course, many benefits for people and the environment. It creates opportunities for employment. And then also, it's based on renewable resources that are sustainable. In sectors like tourism, they have excellent growth potential. And we've done quite a lot of research to show the investment in the biodiversity economy, bioeconomy. We heard quite a lot of that this morning in several of the presentations. And we've done research to show that the biodiversity economy actually has the opportunity to produce jobs equivalent to the mining sector. And I can send you that paper. So last slide. this is just a summary, really looking at the benefits of maintaining ecological infrastructure, and I'll speak about this in my interventions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deshni. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we start, you know, where we say -1 minute, you know, and not stop, and then -1, -2. So Francisco, please, the floor is yours. So Francisco Gomez is the Chief Operating Officer at Terrazos. So you have the CV obviously in the website. So thank you, Francisco, and sorry you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Jeff. We're good. It is. Yeah. Hey, thank you. And first, I want to thank GDN, the University Future Earth, the city of Quito. It's turning out to be a really nice event. We'll see how it ends, but I want to put like a context of who I am and who is Terrazos. We're a Colombian company, and we focused on investments around biodiversity. And why biodiversity? The whole focus is that I'm so glad Ashley was before me, because that context is something that you will see in most mega biodiverse countries, and that is that the countries that currently hold their natural areas pristine usually are countries that have very low development indices. And in a way, we are in depth with those communities, and in terms of the whole environmental issues around the world and crises. One of the biggest concerns is around how are we going to develop these communities, but not do it the same way as we developed historically the rest of the world, where actually nature was the one that was being impacted. And how to achieve this is a very existential question. It was one of the biggest questions in terms of carbon. No, it's easy to say we're going to reduce emissions, yes, but who has to reduce them first? And should countries that need to develop be as obliged as those that have already developed and that historically have a bigger debt on their shoulders? And because of this immense challenge, not only around carbon, but also around biodiversity, we in Terrazos feel that the solution should come from biodiverse, mega biodiverse countries and communities, a southern solution, if you will. What I'm going to show you is why we feel this way and what is the solution that we're trying to project in Colombia and to the world around biodiversity credits. These are the principles that we work by, and we try to live by them. And our goal basically is to protect and restore the most threatened ecosystems in the world. And we do it through what we call exceptional conservation project. That means high integrity nature assets that we can actually sell and we can actually market to those which we need to connect with, basically investors, banks, finance professionals, so that they have the confidence in the asset they're buying, that it will have the permanence in time, and that it will show the gains that we are actually claiming. This is how we deliver projects in Terrazos. Basically, we have an advisory and consultancy office. We try to help companies create biodiversity portfolios, and basically what I'm going to talk to you about today, we develop habitat banks and conservation areas that produce these credits. So the challenge, we saw this graph earlier, and the challenge is huge. But basically, if we are going to reach that inflection point by 2030, where we can actually call a nature positive strategy successful, we should have started working on this years ago, basically. But what we plan is for the solution to be very robust, and that's the habitat bank. Basically, what we want is for a project not to be dispersed in a territory, but to aggregate all the possible solutions in a bigger area that is both legally, financially, and also technically managed, and that can be a security for the ones that are buying those credits. What we sell, 10 meter squares of land, but with a permanence of 30 years. And the idea is that if you add up both conservation and restoration activities, you can actually increase the size of the habitat bank that you have, and that will create the biodiversity gain that you as a buyer can actually adopt, and you actually have the right to claim it as your own. Because this is new, and because there has been so much talk around the carbon market, we focused on developing what was to be the first protocol for issuing biodiversity credits. Biodiversity is way more complex than carbon in the sense that you won't have one single metric, like the tons of CO2 equivalent. So in biodiversity, you will have many different metrics associated with the different ecosystems where you work. In Terrazos, we basically work on 4 factors for each project. 1, the category threat of the ecosystem. 2, the opportunity of connectivity, so projects are actually understood in a landscape context. 3, the duration or the permanence of the project, so it should be minimum 20 years. We work, all our projects are for 30 years. And 4, the activities that you're going to perform, so preservation activities, but also restoration activities. So the idea is that you have additionality as a core concept, and you can actually, from a baseline where you start the project, you can actually show the biodiversity gains in time. The idea is for this, as I mentioned earlier, to be a high integrity project. So we designed a decentralized value chain where each project is registered to an independent registry platform, usually with the use of blockchain in terms of creating traceability and transparency of all of the assets, with a validation and verification body. That's the one that makes the reports of compliance in terms of the milestones, both ecological and management milestones reached by the project, and allows the project to actually issue the credits. The idea is for all of this value chain to be risk management for any project, and that can actually work for the integrity of the credits that we're selling. So far, the idea is to bring opportunities to the territories that need livelihoods, and that if we don't give them to them, we'll use the biodiversity they have to obtain those livelihoods. So from our point of view, all projects should be performance-based. The idea is for them to be able to help with all goals and forecasts for 2030, but also to be people-centered. So we design the projects with the communities. The communities are the ones that operate these projects, and they're the ones that receive most of the benefits around the credits. Understanding as well that these communities and these stewards of the land are the ones that have helped sustain those forests or those ecosystems so long, but they're also the highest threat if we don't help them with their development and their livelihoods. And of course, we want all of this to be driven by science. So the MRB, all monitoring and verification processes should be rigorous and should be focused on actually obtaining those biodiversity gains. And finally, what is required for this to work? We need to understand that this is a new market, and that we need to strengthen the infrastructure around registries, around exchanges, around validation and verification bodies for us to be able to show that confidence and in the projects that we do, and that the market understands them. We need to commit and for the companies to pledge their reductions in impact, but also to start creating nature positive strategies that actually build nature and not only offset the impacts that we're already causing. And of course, this hopefully will bring liquidity to a market that needs it. And we need to understand that this has to work as a community-centered approach, so that safeguards are embedded in the process. And not only that we show that these biodiversity gains can be achieved, but that the communities that are living next to these projects are actually receiving the benefits and are the most interested in the projects to continue and achieving their goals in the 30-year period. That's me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Francisco. I mean, your view complements Deshni, because we have the private sector now involved in nature-based solutions, so that's becoming interesting, no? So we have the honor to have Guilma Kelboro Mensura, so the floor is yours. Thank you. 10 minutes. Yeah. Guilma is the senior researcher and the Center for Development Research at the University of Bonn. Sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an exciting moment for me to be here. Thanks to GDN to connect me to a network first, and then to invite me to this forum. I'll try to share a long time research work of myself and students with whom I have been working in a form of summary, and I will try to show you something as cases. I will try to be brief, okay? You can see already on the title, the conclusion of what I'm going to say. What I'm going to say is, let's begin from local and indigenous communities and work up to the global level. Then we are on the safest position. And these trade-offs can be managed much more easily. That is the line of argument I'm going to make. In the tropics, especially, culture and nature are very much connected. Indigenous and local people and nature belong together, and they interact more closely. If you go to many African countries, when we talk about nature, it's not only about forest areas, not only about river-based systems, but land itself. Even agricultural areas, land itself, for them is, they belong to the land and the land belongs to them. So for example, in Ethiopia, if you say something, especially in rural areas, to guarantee the community that you are telling the truth, they ask you to just swear by hitting the ground. That means you have said the truth. If not, you will not do that. Because in the culture, there is a belief that if you are telling a lie and doing that, the consequence will be that your life will end soon. So it is very much connected. You don't go to court. It's institutionalized there. There is an organized system to manage conflicts. It's hugely connected to nature. Nature and culture is like culture-nature continuum. Difficult to establish boundaries. As an academician, I try to understand what culture is and what nature is, which is not the way people look at. So to make it easier for myself, for my analysis, I try to say that, okay, culture defines nature and nature affects culture. I'm sure you will challenge me with that point. Culture gets lost also if we destroy nature, and nature gets its meaning also from culture. They are very much interconnected. For indigenous or local communities, nature is more than a source of resources. Nature is their history, and nature is also their belonging. So if we understand this highly connected way of nature and culture, and we start from the bottom, then we now have the problems as people define them, and the solutions also from their knowledge systems, indigenous local knowledge systems, already from the system. I'm not saying that it is complete, but we can start with, we can build on that and work towards joint solutions. So biodiversity loss, climate change, and poverty are understood as part of complexity if we look at these human-environment interactions, and it is not really separate. When COVID-19 happened, coming from Germany, in Germany it was a shock. It is a perfectionist society. No one has to die of this, so we were all masked. After some time, after having these changes, Corona started to aggravate in some African countries. Ethiopia was one. So when we got permission to travel, I traveled to Ethiopia. There was mask always. Airlines were following some rules. And when I landed in Ethiopia, people looked at me with mask and they started to run away. Because for them, COVID-19 was not a top priority problem. We did also a small research on that, and they said that COVID-19 is one of the problems they have. Many other problems, even climate was on top. They didn't say climate change, but they told us with the consequence, like for example, flooding and other risks associated with climate change, drought, and so on. These were on top, and COVID-19 was bottom. For us in Germany, however, COVID-19 was on top. We got funding for that. It was very quick. The proposal shouldn't have been very complete. Peer review was very quick. So we act in a different way. And when we go to those people for whom we are going, we say we are going to work, they have different priorities. This picture tells us how climate change is connected to livelihood and how it affects the life of farmers. It happened once where pastoralists and smallholder farmers live together, and the farmland was suddenly taken away because of heavy rainfall after a long time drought. They didn't expect that to happen. It was a disaster for them. So one can easily see how climate change is related to poverty, livelihood, and biodiversity has been affected already over this change of climate, and some species are becoming more aggressive. That's from the perception of the communities. Others are getting lost, which they value maybe more in terms of medicine and other cattle grazing and so on. So there's a lot of change taking place. So you can see already from the picture that climate change is linked to biodiversity, poverty, and so on. Actions have been specialized so far. We used to conserve biodiversity in protected areas mostly. If you take Ethiopia, it's very strict. If it's a national park, no one is allowed to enter. Then that means increasing poverty because people have been living with nature for a long time and then we are excluding them. Climate actions are focusing more on nature-based solutions. Culture and these social aspects in institutions are forgotten, left out, then another problem. Some countries have poverty reduction programs. Ethiopia is one of them. In poverty reduction programs, they focus on attracting investment and allocating even some conservation areas to investors. And then what does that mean? Focusing on economy, national economic growth, GDP. How about distribution? This is forgotten. Yeah, other players, global players are doing also their part because of their own priorities, not relevant to local communities. Don't worry, nothing to memorize. I will not ask you any question. This is only to show that in one national park we studied, known as National Park in southern Ethiopia, a lot of interest groups, actors converge around that national park. So if we are going to plan sustainable management for that park, all this should be equally important partners in all discussions. Again, in farm study, farm areas, as I said, land is also a very important resource for farmers. We try to modify sustainable livelihood approach. And then we looked at the risks. Many risks are there. Sorry. So many risks are there. And the capitals, different kinds of capitals are affected by risks. Climate change is one of those risks. Then what we shouldn't forget is governance. The governance aspect is equally important as what we look at in nature. The whole process define and affect the risk perception and the livelihood outcomes for people. Therefore, let's be open-minded, start from the bottom and work upwards. This traditional way of research also, in which we define problems, develop proposals, get funding, and go to local communities, indigenous communities to do research, should change now. Let's start from the bottom and work upwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Girma. So you have a roadmap towards public policy. That's great. And culture is important. So now we go to the virtual speakers. I think I don't know if Anya Gassner is already connected.
Yes. I just unmuted myself. It's evening here. Welcome to everybody in the room and who is actually joining us virtually. I'm very excited to be in this panel and also very thankful that you have invited me. I would have loved to be with you there in person, but I also am quite grateful to have this option of this very low carbon way of joining you via Zoom. So just 3 weeks ago, we had the Global Landscape Forum in Nairobi, a new vision for Earth. And Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, former Costa Rican Environment and Energy Minister and elected CEO or chairperson of the Global Environmental Facility, said that instead of talking about the triple planetary crisis, biodiversity, climate pollution, it would be more appropriate to call it an ecological collapse, because that's what it is. The life support system of planet Earth is collapsing. And we are seeing this collapse at all scales we're working at. Already 50 years ago, a group of scientists predicted that, the Club of Rome. In its first publication, The Limits of Growth, published ahead of the 1972 Stockholm Summit for the Earth, they warned that if growth trends in population, industrialization, resource use, and pollution continued unchanged, it would lead to global scale environmental degradation, triggering existential dangers to humanity. So where are we now, 50 years later? We just had the UN Decade on Biodiversity 2011 to 2020, and yes, it achieved some key successes, including mobilizing governments to set awareness targets and elevating the role of indigenous peoples in biodiversity protection. But overall, we failed. We failed to reach the broad segments of society. We failed to deliver the message that our fate as society urgently relies on biodiversity. For far too many people still believe that biodiversity conservation means protecting species in their natural habitat. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is marking a fundamental shift in that thinking. With the GBF, the CBD for the first time is recognizing the importance of conserving and restoring biodiversity in all ecosystems, goal A. All ecosystems for the first time means including cities and agricultural landscapes. For the first time, the CBD thus gives a mandate to governments to address biodiversity not longer only as an ecological goal, but as a goal and a concern for the whole of society. It's never been there before. So to illustrate my point that our fate relies on biodiversity, I would like to use the example of forests and food production. Tropical forests are some of the most diverse ecosystems. There's a common belief that protection of forest ecosystems means that we have to compromise food production and that therefore curtail the development of the rural areas adjacent to the forest. But this argument is very simplistic and tendacious. We know that forests provide global, regional, and local ecosystem services, including soil health and carbon capture. This not only helps regulate water availability, but actually essentially for the rainfall pattern that humans and our food systems have adapted to. So for example, trees and plants draw water from the soil and exhale it into the atmosphere, which affects how heat and water are balanced on the Earth's surface. That controls the water and the weather, essentially. Deforestation has a clear and dramatic effect on rainfall. And we all do know that we're losing our forests. The bottom line is, if we don't have forests and other natural ecosystems, we can't grow food. They actually give us the foundation for our food systems. If we take the Amazon is in real danger of ceasing to be a rainforest due to deforestation rates combined with rising temperatures, seasonal instability, and wildfires. The Amazon biome is already struggling to produce its own rain, and it may be losing its function as a water-generating rainforest. This is what we as scientists refer to as the tipping points for the Amazon. And the early stages are already well on their way. Without the Amazon's vital function of climate regulation within the Amazon basin, cattle ranching will no longer be possible in the Amazon basin. The existence of the Amazon is therefore crucial for meat production and the local economy. If we accept that we need functioning forests to have the water and the biomass to grow crops or produce livestock, then the question is, how do we design food production systems that support and enhance the functioning of natural ecosystems, such as forests? Forests need genetic flow, and patches of natural habitat within agricultural landscape can provide these vital stepping stones for seeds, animals, and plants to move between landscapes. We need a transformational shift away from policies that favor mostly simplified, monocultural, conventional agriculture, and towards policies that actively promote biodiversity-friendly mixed farming systems at landscape scale. Many farmers around the world, especially in the tropics, already managed mixed farming systems such as agroforestry, combining a diversity of crops, animals, and trees with different spatial and seasonal arrangements. Not only does this support both connectivity and integrity of forests, but it also directly contributes to reductions in pollution. These mixed farming systems mimic natural processes, making the best of the interactions between each part. Sustainability in food production goes beyond ecology. The rise of highly specialized, vertically integrated, large commodity-producing landscapes has resulted in a decline of agrobiodiversity, unequal bargaining power along the value chain, a lack of options for farmers, and increasing barriers to market access for other produce. This had a direct negative effect on household food consumption, and it's driving inequality between urban consumers and rural producers. So when we talk about biodiversity-friendly agriculture value chains, we need to think about balancing global value chains with local and regional value chains and products. The reconstruction of regional and local agri-food system and value chains will not only provide for the diverse dietary demands of rural populations, but also directly benefit producer families and create job and business opportunities in rural areas, especially for young people. So 50 years after the Limit to Growth, the Club of Rome published its latest publication, Earth for All, a survival guide for humanity. We do know what the solutions are to the crisis we are facing. The report names the 5 turnarounds as ending poverty, addressing inequality, reaching gender equity, transitioning to clean energy, and making our food systems healthy for people and planet. So we do have the solutions. What we struggle with is an understanding that the redistribution of resources that is needed for this transition to this new economic model does not mean less value, but more value for me as an individual. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. Thank you very much. So now we have Priya Sundar, sorry. She's a lead economist at the Nature Conservancy. Thank you, the floor is yours, and you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen? You can't see anything, but can you see it now?
Now
Can
yes.
you can see it? Can you speak up, please? Can you see it and can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
Anya, I can see. Anya gave me the thumbs up, so I presume everybody. Yeah, thank you so very much. Like Anya, my apologies really for not being present. I wish I was there. And thank you for this opportunity to join virtually. So many of us who are working on the global biodiversity framework continue to be challenged by this question: conservation for whom? You know, who are we doing this for? Conservation strategies over the last decades and framings, in fact, have evolved over the last decades as science, understandings of science, what works and doesn't work, and key ideas have advanced. The late Dr. Mace, in a well-known commentary in Science, discusses how the focus of conservation has shifted from valuing nature for itself in the 1960s and 70s to nature despite people in the 80s and 90s, to nature for people in the early 2000s, and to people and nature in recent years. We argue in a recent commentary, and that's what I'm going to discuss in the next 9 minutes, that given where the world is right now, we are perhaps in a fifth phase that requires us to think about nature and equity, and to consider opportunities to jointly address environmental challenges and economic and social inequality. And that is the ask of this panel today. And there may well be some ways to address conservation and equity together. And there are hints of this when we look at where biodiversity, threats to biodiversity, and economic inequality co-occur in countries around the world. The top panel depicts the overall relationship between biodiversity and national income inequality measured in terms of the Gini index. The bottom panel shows the relationship between inequality and threats to biodiversity. So the data at least demonstrate that biodiversity and threats to biodiversity increase broadly as income inequality increases. Now, to be clear, these figures do not show causation. That is not the claim at all. But they suggest that changing some underlying conditions, just as Tanya alluded to a few minutes ago, changing some underlying conditions could potentially reduce threats to nature as well as people in some cases. To further ground us, I'd like to share some work that we've been doing at the Nature Conservancy on nature and equity. As you know, TNC is a large environmental NGO with its major focus being the climate crisis and biodiversity conservation. But just like as it is with GDN, there is a lot of interest and a lot of churning that is happening related to equitable conservation and what that might actually mean if we were truly to integrate equity into conservation. So a couple of years ago, we started to ask this question: how are we doing this? Who in this large organization is practicing more equitable conservation, and how? You know, why and how? In large organizations, in decentralized large organizations, at any point in time, there's hundreds of experiments that are ongoing in conservation and in equitable conservation. And so we wanted to understand from this. Now, our scope had to be a little more limited, so we used a case study approach to try and learn about how equity was being embedded in work across TNC. So we looked at efforts to improve artisanal fisheries in Peru, at efforts to conserve an ancient temperate rainforest in Chile. We looked at the first water fund being established in Kenya. In Africa, it's the first one. And in the Australian case, we discuss a long-term strategy to improve biodiversity and human well-being outcomes by working with indigenous communities. And in the Solomons, the focus was on improving coastal management through careful consideration of mining policy. Simultaneously, we looked at the literature to clarify what does it mean to strengthen equity in conservation. This framework on the screen for all of you is quite well known, identifying the 3 dimensions of equity, and it seems to actually work quite well for what is happening on the front lines of conservation. Recognitional equity refers to the acknowledgement and respect of identity values, associated rights. Procedural equity is all about how decisions are made, who's at the table. And distributional equity, most of us here, I imagine at GDN, are economists, we understand this very well. It's about the allocation and distribution of resources, costs and benefits, and so on. I don't have time to get into the individual cases, but here is a sort of a listing of the types of interventions used by different case study teams, crosswalked across different dimensions of equity. So these are our sort of equity instruments, if you will. How do you do this? These are some of the ways in which you can do it. To draw attention to a few examples, policy work in Peru, where the government recognized fisher self-governance of resources by law. Indigenous fire management systems are being reused to manage carbon stocks in indigenous savanna lands in Northern Australia, a strategy that works for climate, biodiversity, and for reducing inequality. Engaging the power of women's networks to change mining policies in the Solomons, where trained women facilitators were able to bring women's voices to the table in mining areas and really inform a major mining bill that was being developed. And so on and so forth. I don't have time to discuss all of them, but there's a host of strategies that can be used. And I want to draw your attention to some lessons from the cases. I'm mindful of the fact that these are only 5 cases. Still, one needs to generalize. So what we learned from these cases first was that it's really useful to think about the different dimensions of equity. Very much so because you actually need different tools. You know, your toolkit is a little bit different to address the different dimensions. And so that's, you know, and these dimensions can be aggregated, right? So it's not that they don't overlap, but they can be aggregated. Economists tend to focus on trade-offs, and conservationists often focus on win-wins. But we really need to understand both of these win-wins and trade-offs between equity, biodiversity, and climate change. So there is sort of, I'm going to call for much research and learning that still remains to be done. Equitable solutions, particularly at the community level, need to be co-produced. I think this was also alluded to by at least 2 of the speakers. I simply cannot reinforce how strongly this lesson was conveyed to us. This work takes time and it takes trust building. And trust to me is the tree that forever gives. So this is something that we really need to keep in mind. And solutions are tied to capacity building. We just can't get around the need for inclusive financing. So I'm very intrigued by what Teresos has to offer and really hoping to see where this goes. I know we'll be talking about this a bit more.
2 minutes, sorry.
Okay, no, I just have one more slide. I'd like to end with some lessons. You know, I think you asked us, these are questions that might emerge, but just for some lessons for different groups that emerge from this work, groups that are represented here at GDN. You know, it's really important to be thinking about long-term commitments if we want to forge equitable solutions. These commitments do not mean financial commitments, but where we're working with communities, it is commitment to these communities, right? In whatever fashion that is. For researchers, there's this this is where social science meets conservation, right? There's this huge need. We need to use every tool we can find, you know, whether it's systematizing case study learnings, you know, evaluating through remote sensing data and econometric assessments, examining macro influences, but also thinking about combining science, you know, really good science with local knowledge. Yeah, so that's where I think the frontier is. Capacity building is clearly critical. So here's a message for donors. Flexible funding is something that pretty much everybody where we looked at these cases, they said the flexible funding had been incredibly important for building these equitable solutions. And equity inclusion is very context specific, but we can learn from each other. So cross-fertilization can happen through fora such as GDN, but the world is complex, and my ask is for more transdisciplinary partnerships. I will end here. I have this last pretty slide where I was going to talk about the Global Biodiversity Framework, especially Target 3 that I'm interested in, and make a call out to researchers here at GDN, but we can come back to this. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
I'll stop sharing.
So we go to some round of questions, but I wanted just to pick some words that we're taking here. We have different views, which is clear that biodiversity is a fact. Second one, I think in the last presentation, you talked about case studies and then about scaling up. No, so my question coming from another field is the ones who are in the field, no? How do you feel that there is a long way to go? I mean, in terms of advocacy, in terms of this dialogue between experts and honest brokers, I mean, the honest policymakers, and also with the private sector. You know what I mean? I mean, like how far we have to go in order not to spoil the actual countries that are classified as biodiverse countries. I don't know if you understand my question. I'm a little bit, asking, are those still experiments in local situations which are very successful experiments, or these are already in the biodiverse countries state policies? Whoever wants to answer.
Sure. So I'd like to take to start, and I want to pick on this topic of capacity building and communities of practice, because that's what we found in the various projects that we've implemented, that having the policies are well and good, but actually getting the people to implement them happens not at global or a national level even, it happens at local level. And we've invested quite a lot of our donor funds in developing strong communities of practice within the critical biodiversity areas and in the critical catchments that we work in. So in my presentation, I shared the strategic water source areas. So we have 22 of them in South Africa, surface water, strategic water source areas, and we have communities of practice in at least 10 of them, where we bring all stakeholders, so communities, researchers, all levels of government, Sandy as the convener of the space, being a neutral, bringing everybody together to discuss how we're going to be implementing, achieving local solutions for what the people need to address our developmental challenges. So it's well and good to have fancy policies and tools, but if it's really not implementable, then it's just not going to be dealing with the challenges. Thanks.
Right. Does anyone of the speakers wants to react? Anya?
I think Priya was first. So over to Priya.
Okay.
Go ahead, Anya. I can come later.
Okay. Well, you asked the question whether we're still at the stage where we have sort of like, how would we say that, place-based success stories that do not, I don't actually like the word scaling, but maybe are not mainstream. I think we are at a stage where we're seeing a massive shift. Last year at COP15, for those of you that were there, it's the first time that the private sector actually has been at a biodiversity COP. and it was a huge COP and a huge presence of the private sector. We have mandatory requirements now in the UK as well as in the EU for investors to disclose the ESG requirements. You have the zero deforestation value chain law in Europe, and it's triggering a massive change within corporate sector and private sector, which directly affects all the tropical landscapes that most of us are working in, because they are the sourcing landscapes for Europe. So one thing I think that we all need to be aware of, we have the task force on nature disclosure, which is the one looking at the ESG requirements and is setting right now the standards for the industry to report on, that they're quite far with the environmental matrices, but they're not very far with the social ones. And I think for all of us, especially in a session here discussing about equity, it's for us to actually get a bit ahead of the game to make sure that, and Priya, you really nicely pointed this out, like we all worked on this. There's like lots of information available and experience on social safeguards and how to actually do these properly in a participatory way. And that's where we need to focus on right now, because the industry is setting these matrices right now. So we need to ensure that we give the advice and the guidance that it is actually in line of the needs of the local communities we're working with, and that it's actually hearing their voices.
Thank you.
Over to you, Priya.
Yeah.
So my thoughts on this are slightly different, I think. I do think that we've come a long way in terms of policy and global thinking about how we need to address this nexus between inequality and biodiversity loss and climate. You know, we for instance, just with the 30 by 30 framework that the globe has agreed upon, that people are front and center in this framework. And so we've just, we've really come further down the road. But what does that mean in terms of on the ground work? Does it really work at that scale? And I'm not sure that I'm terribly optimistic that we are at some sort of inflection point there, and we're just about to take off by addressing these problems and the inequality social considerations. I do think there is a lot of work ahead of us in this space. Financing may open some doors, and that's a good thing, but a lot of it will depend on the institutions on the ground, the regulatory frameworks, the enabling conditions. And that moves, as all of you know, very slowly. And there's work to be done in that space before we can be sure that any of the gains that we make are durable.
Okay, thank you. If the speakers you want to react? Okay, Francisco wants to react before we take some questions from the audience.
Thank you. I just wanted to add. I think there's the biodiversity ranking and the mega diverse countries, but it shouldn't be understood as a value ranking. Not because you're more biodiverse means in another country biodiversity is not as equally as important. And I think that's one thing to understand, but it is important to measure and to try to restore biodiversity in terms of biodiversity gains. I think that creates like a more level playing field. I completely agree with Anya in terms of how we are seeing the international policy movement around biodiversity since COP15 shift just the narratives and the discourse around biodiversity. But I would add that urgency is the way we should be thinking. And I don't think there's much more time to be spent trying to think of better ways of doing, but we need to start doing, and while we are at it, evaluate and create better practices for the projects that are being built. I think there are solutions that can be mainstreamed and that we should be working on. And just in terms of the concept around markets and how we've seen, for example, the carbon market evolve. The whole point of the carbon market was that if we worked on it hard enough, once it was confident and once the market was strong enough, the market was the one that was going to take us to meet the goals of climate change, because the market can work way faster than what research can do, or what NGOs can do, or what philanthropy can do. And I think that we need to understand what has gone well, what needs to get better in those carbon markets. But especially, we need to understand that in terms of biodiversity, we're really far behind in the resources that are needed. So yeah, urgency is the word.
So we are picking questions from the audience. If there are some questions from the audience, no, we are all optimistic. Okay, so let me who? Okay, great. They're far away, so let's wait 5 minutes until the micro is over there. Because I have a question.
Hello. Yeah. My question is for Francisco. My name is Peter Shear from the Asociación de Propietarios de Tierras Rurales del Norte de Ecuador. Francisco, I wanted to know through Terrazos, if you have a process to evaluate the environmental practices of your clients, o sea, como un proceso de verduría, to ensure that the clients that are buying these biodiversity credits, por decir, are actually environmentally responsible themselves, because presumably they'll be using these credits to promote their empresas or interests, to say, look, hey, we are so environmental, right? And my other question is, in cases of mining or oil concessions that already exist, would your project still go into these areas that are already concessioned to establish these biodiversity credits? And furthermore, if those projects are already established, what would happen in the case of like a servidumbre forzosa on the part of a mining or oil or other extractive concession?
Servidumbre is a tax, no? Yeah.
Okay, so it's a good question. First, we operate on two markets. So the compliance market in Colombia regarding obligations that big companies need to comply with. So mining companies, oil companies, infrastructure, electricity, transportation. Those companies, when we have a habitat bank and they have obligations, they need their obligations to be located on the same watershed that caused their impact and on an equivalent ecosystem where the impact was caused as well. In that sense, we're actually helping them comply with regulation. So it's not about doing like due diligence around their practices. And in terms of the voluntary market, there's this big question around greenwashing, which is what I got from your question. We don't actually do due diligence on our clients, because just the fact that they're actually buying the credits means they are working towards a strategy of nature positive, if the credits are on a voluntary sense. And what I mean by this is, I don't want to get into the whole greenwashing thing, but it is important to set things into context. Many of the companies that are not even buying these credits, that are just keeping their mouth closed and are not disclosing, and they're not doing anything, they're the majority. The ones that are actually trying to do something are probably the ones that are being more focused on by the media in terms of greenwashing. But just the fact that they're trying to change practices, I think it's better than not doing anything at all. And also the idea of mainstreaming something like this is that you won't have the capacity to actually do a due diligence for each of the buyers that you have. Even so, the buyers could be individuals. So you could go into the website of Terrazos right now and buy one credit. No, it's impossible. But I think that's not the role of Terrazos. What we try is to build high integrity projects so that the people that are buying it, or the companies that are buying it, can move forward in a high integrity strategy towards the nature positive.
Thank you, Francisco. So the President Jean-Louis Arcan wants to have the last word. Okay, I'm teasing you.
No, so my question is, maybe it's the Girma, but everybody else. So in my world of my former world of economics and development economics, the people who've taken over right now are the people who do RCTs, who do randomized control trials. And yeah, don't get me started. I will not start. But the point is, RCTs provide us, sort of, let me translate what people have been saying in some sense. They give us perfect internal validity, maybe. Okay? Other policies have good external validity. So when we're talking about these things, so for example, Girma, from the local to the global, you have stuff which are perfectly internal valid, in terms of sort of what local populations have come up with in terms of solutions. How externally valid is this stuff? And from where I sit, it looks like, in some sense, so let me be provocative here, we're making the same mistake as the randomistas.
It's for you.
Thank you for this interesting question. It is difficult, of course. However, if I take one of the protected areas I studied, I try to make myself open, because sometimes we have defined problems. I'm doing it from social science point of view. I try to go to the community and start to talk openly. And finally, the issues were different. Therefore, if we are talking about that particular community, which has lived there for generations, hundreds, if not thousands of years, if we are going to make life better for them, we should understand them. External validity is recognizing the human-environment relationships that have evolved over time, through time, understand that, and some of the issues may be not easy to address, but some of the issues may be addressed, and then others can come around that. So it is a way of looking from the community's perspective, from the local perspective. I think we will not be very far away from each other. One paper, I tried to write one paper out of, I hope the funders will not hear about this. I was funded for one particular research topic, but on the sideline, I make it open and try to discuss with the communities regarding biodiversity knowledge. They are concerned about biodiversity. They have their ways of describing it, the trends, management strategies as well. However, the management strategies they suggest are different. The scope differs. And the biodiversity aspect that they prioritize differ. But there are lots of commonalities between the scientific point of view and the indigenous or local knowledge point of view. So it is possible to work in a way that we can co-create knowledge institutions that can be long-lasting. So far, what we have experienced is take participatory forest management. Ethiopia has been implementing participatory forest management since 1990s. The model was imported from the joint forest management model of India. India started in end of 1960s or 1970s. It was imported to Ethiopia directly, tried to implement it. I don't think we have succeeded. If we had started from there, of course, we take the experience of India, but let's take it. But the Indian context is different. The institutions, everything is different. We bring the model, but let's see the context here. And then operationalize it within that context. So it shouldn't be really validation, which is very difficult, but let's find ways of working together with local stakeholders in a way that can make us sustainable towards the future.
Thank you, Girma. Anja, I think you have a question in mind, correct?
No, I would like to actually respond to that question as well. And I would like to actually echo what was just said.
Okay.
I do fully understand, and we all deal with that decision makers, being people that actually have designed development policies or people that need to prioritize funding, that you would like to get sort of like something in your hand that tells you, oh, if you do that, this is going to be successful. I think what has come back very clearly and is well understood by now is that what it is really about, and that's what the previous speaker just said, it's about the sovereignty of these communities. They are the stewards of the land. They have worked the resources. They do know how to manage a resource, so we actually can combine an economic development as well as a conservation approach. I mean, if we take people from the Amazon, if we take forest communities, that's how do you perfectionize growing foods under forest without actually diminishing the ecological functioning of that forest? That's a skill. That's amazing. So I think what it is, it's like what the previous speaker just said, give sovereignty and financial means to local communities that they can upscale, develop, and perfectionize their local knowledge and their local solutions. It isn't for us to come back to say what is a blanket solution that works for everybody. Thank you.
Now, so thank you very much to all the speakers. Thank you to you. So we just a big applause for the speakers, and thank you so much. Thank you. We're done, yeah. So we're going to repeat the applause.
Sorry, in my intervention, I didn't bring in this aspect of that we've been grappling with in South Africa, but of course, very central to the Global South debate is this investment in capacity. And from this morning to the several of the presentations today, we focused on that investment in capacity building. But what we found from our projects and research is that investment in capacity building, not only well at local level, but at national level, where you invest in the country to develop their knowledge, their data, their systems, so that they can be, I guess, contributing to global reporting like we have done for our CBD reporting, but also using that knowledge and data that's brought together for national decision making. And we've managed to do that in our national biodiversity assessment. We're in our 4th iteration of our national assessment. All of that information used or mainstreamed into development planning, EIAs. So that investment not in global data sets, but really investment at national level for capacity to be built at national level. And also a lot of what we've been doing with Colombia and other southern countries, these learning exchanges. So really promoting that in-person, not just virtual training, but really developing capacity at national level for them, for us to be dealing with our national priorities and challenges. Thanks.
Okay, now yes, like in theater. Okay, again,